It's one of the great architectural icons of all time, and after more than 30 years, this building still has the power to take your breath away. Note to other cities, you want the world to stand up and take notice? Build the most stunning, audacious landmark you can think of. Build it and they will come. When it opened in 1973, the Sydney Opera House did nothing less than put Sydney on the centre stage. 150 years before the Opera House was built, Fort Macquarie stood on Bennelong Point. And for the first half of the 20th century, the best piece of real estate in Sydney housed nothing more than a tram shed. So when the powers that be tore up the tram lines in the late 50s, it became obsolete. And it was a good thing too, because let's face it, an architectural icon called the Sydney Tram Shed was never going to bring millions of tourists to our shores. The inspiration for a theatrical landmark came from Eugene Goossens. In the late 1940s, he was poached from England to be the high-profile conductor of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. He liked the gig, but hated the digs. So Goossens began to campaign for Sydney to have a world-class concert and opera theatre. In 1954, Sydney was a real meat and three veg kind of town, and that was on a good day. If I may be bold, it was stultifying in its provincial lack of sophistication. And yet, in this cultural climate, there was a meeting of minds. Two men, Eugene Goossens and Labor Premier Joe Cahill. The shed would make way for the house, and an international design competition was launched. Over 200 architects from around the world submitted their visions. The winner, announced in 1957, was a young Dane called Jorn Utzon. At first glance, it looked as though Jorn had entered the wrong competition. His house looked more like a yacht, sails are billowing. Herald readers were both outraged and enraptured with the radical design. Letters to the editor described it variously as a circus tent in a gale, some large and lovely ship of the imagination, and my favourite, a piece of Danish pastry. Utzon flew out here with his family to bring his vision to reality. His son Jorn recalls his excitement.
He was very happy that Australians had given him the chance to do the Opera House in the first place, because nowhere else in the world would that building have been built.
He had no idea of the storm of controversy he was flying into.
Premier Joe Cahill, he started the project without having any working drawings, without having any cost analysis made, and therefore, as the train got rolling, nobody knew what it was going to cost or how long time it will take, or even how to solve the problems.
It was one thing to design the greatest opera house ever conceived, and quite another to build it. Picture, if you will, the first site meeting between Utzon, plans in hand, and the project manager getting his first squiz. So, it's 10 soaring sail seat, covered in tiles with a ton of glass to fill in the gaps. This was an ambitious project. Talk about a building built for drama. Surprise, surprise, everything blew out. The budget, the time frame, tempers. To the public at least, it seemed the aspiring eighth wonder of the world was taking forever to complete.
What do you think of it?
It's interesting. Different. When will it be finished?
That's a good question. Nobody's ever asked that before.
In 1965, the cold winds of change blew in when Bob Askin became Premier. He ordered his Minister for Works, Davis Hughes, the Country Party member for Armidale, to rein in the budget. Then it was on for young and old. It was the Philistines versus the cultural elites, with poor Jorn in the middle. Utzon had to get every change in design, every drawing, approved by a politician. It was more than the Great Dane could bear. He hired a young lawyer called Neville Wran, later to become Premier, to advise him in his dispute with the Askin government.
Utzon was treated appallingly. It's true that there was quite a bit of experimentation in the design and the construction. That's why, of course, it's now one of the great buildings of the world, because the experimentation was successful. And Utzon needed the velvet glove not the mailed fist. And I could understand how in one-to-one verbal combat he'd be no match for a roughhouse state politician from the bush. And they took advantage of that.
And by not paying him over a stretch of time, the government actually forced him to say, I can't continue this. I have to stop working and disband my office because I can't afford to have them anymore. And that was taken as a resignation, and shortly after the new architects were appointed publicly.
In the end, Utzon took his bat and ball and went home, and a team of local architects was appointed to finish the job.
As you see things now, will the completion date of the end of 1972 still be obtained?
Yes, I'm quite sure about this.
Well, he wasn't far off. It only took 14 years to complete. The final bill for the house came to $102 million. Look, it was a prime bit of Sydney real estate. It was north-facing, and the views. In October 1973, Her Majesty the Queen finally opened the house for business.
Look, before the Opera House, we had no natural centre in Sydney, or indeed in the whole of Australia, for the performing arts. And it's brought a boom that's immeasurable in money. It's brought a recognition that Australia can cater for artists at the highest level, and does regularly. It's just been one of the most exciting things that's happened in my lifetime.
Sadly, Jorn Utzon has never returned to Sydney to see his greatest work with his own eyes. However, he and his architect son Jorn are advising on the redevelopments to the Opera House so that it's consistent with Jorn's original design principles. Yes, the masterpiece on the point, this cultural beacon, is still a work in progress.
There were things that needed to be changed, things that needed to be done, and the philosophy was that if they got the original architects to come back and help guiding this process, then you could probably make the interior slowly over the years achieve the same quality or ambience as exterior. So that's been a wonderful comeback for my father, and a new lease on life in many ways.